Alright, so the content resolver that we started talking about in the end of the last video will execute our query against its data source and give us back a cursor. And then we can then use the cursor just like we've done in previous videos. We'll just end up using a loop to loop through all the rows in the cursor and then to display the contact names. So that bit's easy, but what's this content resolver all about? Let's talk about that in a bit more detail. So to explain about the various classes that are used when we access data using a content provider, let's consider some cooks who need milk and eggs for whatever they're going to be cooking today. Now to get their ingredients for their meal, they're going to go to their local shop to buy milk and eggs. Now the shop uses a number of suppliers. They may send someone to the farmer's market very early in the morning, or the goods might be delivered by huge trucks overnight in the case of modern supermarkets. But however they do it, they can provide milk and eggs when a customer asks for them. Now I've simplified this of course because some modern supply chains tend to be quite complex, but the shop suppliers ultimately get their milk and eggs from a farm. So the slide here shows the flow of food from the source. So the cows and chickens who are the source of the milk or the eggs to the farmer's market. Now the farmer's market supplies the shop with the goods and the shop in turn passes it on to the customer, our cooks in this example. Now I guess the analogy falls down a bit because the milk and eggs only go in one direction, from the source to the suppliers, then to the shop and finally to the customers. In the case of data being retrieved from a data source, we can obviously store data in the database as well as taking it out. But if we ignore the fact that you wouldn't try to put an egg back into a chicken, this maps quite nicely to what we're doing with our content provider and content resolver. So let's see how they fit into all of this. Alright, so data is requested by a client. Now that's a commonly used term in computing for some class or process that requests either data or a service from something else. So here the client is the cooks and they're requesting ingredients from the shop. Now in our case, in an Android program, the client may be an activity or a loader. Now in the example we're working on, the client is main activity as that's what's attempting to retrieve the contact's data. Now main activity requests the data it wants from a content resolver and that's performing the role of the shop in our diagram. Now in the same way that the cooks don't have to know where the milk and eggs are coming from, main activity, the client here, doesn't know where the content resolver will be fetching the contact's data from. So main activity specifies the kind of data it wants, contact's data in this case, in the same way that the cooks specify whether they want milk or eggs. So it's the job of the shop to get the milk from wherever it gets milk from and to get eggs from wherever it gets eggs from. In other words, they don't have to both come from the same place. The key thing here is that when the customer asks for milk, the shop knows where milk comes from. Now if the customer asks for eggs, this is a different request and the shop knows to go to the egg supplier rather than its milk supplier. In the same way, it's the job of the content resolver to get the contact's data from wherever it needs to get it from. Now if we'd ask the content resolver for phone log data instead, it would then go off to a different place, a different supplier in this case, to get the phone log data. Where it goes to get the data is to a content provider. Now we can see here there are two content providers. One supplies milk and the other supplies eggs. So depending on what the customer requests, the shop can go off to the appropriate supplier to get it. Now it's the same when main activity requests contact data from the content resolver. So main activity uses the URI to specify the kind of data that it wants. The content resolver then uses the URI to decide which content provider it should ask to supply the data. Now we're going to be looking a bit more at the mechanisms behind this. At the moment though, we're just seeing how it all fits together. So one important thing here is that the content resolver doesn't know where the content provider will get the data from. And there's no reason why it should, because it just requests the data and expects it to be delivered. The actual details of how the data is collected and from where is irrelevant. Now, in the same way that the store or shop doesn't need to know which farms the suppliers get their milk and eggs from. Now, the content provider fetches the data from its data source. So the milk content provider goes to the cows to get milk, and the eggs content provider goes to the chickens for eggs. In our app, the contacts content provider goes to the contacts database to get the contacts records that have been requested. So you can see that there's quite a bit of abstraction there, but there is in modern shopping habits too. So it's not essential that we have supermarkets and suppliers and so on. We could all go directly to the farms if we wanted to get our milks and eggs there. But if you think about it, that would be terribly inefficient though. So as populations increased and people started living in cities, we started to get layers of abstraction added to the way we shop for food. But going back far enough in time, people may have had their own cow and their own chickens. But then it became more efficient for some people to look after the animals while others became blacksmiths or house builders or whatever. So now the blacksmiths and the builders are abstracted from the source of their food. As the population grew, suppliers collected the milk from farms in the country and supplied the shops in the towns and cities, so that's more levels of abstraction. Now, terms like levels of abstraction or abstracting data can sound very confusing, but this is all that they really mean. When the consumer of data is separated from the source of that data, then that's abstraction. The more things there are between the consumer and the source, the more levels of abstraction there are. So that's how the content resolver fits into our attempt to access the contacts data. Now, the content resolver provides a layer of abstraction between our app, which is the client, and the content provider. The content provider adds another layer of abstraction on top of the underlying data source. An application has a single content resolver that provides access to all the content providers that exist on the Android device. Now that's why we used Get Content Resolver rather than creating a new one, because there is only one and it holds a list of all the content providers that are registered on the device. Now the content resolver uses something called an authority that's included in the URI to decide which content provider to direct data requests to. Now we'll have a look at what an authority is when we create our own content provider later. The important thing is that there's a mechanism that the client can use to let the content resolver know what it wants, and the content resolver uses that to decide where to go for the data. Alright, so that's how it all fits together. I'm going to finish this video here now. In the next video, let's go back and finish off the code and retrieve the contacts now that we've got a good understanding of hopefully got a good understanding of the content provider and also how this content resolver works. So I'll see you in the next video.